ahead and hit the record button. Oh, Bryce, you already started recording?
I'll record it on my end today, John.
Okay. All right, I'm going to start this thing, and we'll get right into the chronological order of the past presidents, starting with Mr. Addis. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Catalyst webinar series presented by the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA. The Catalyst webinar series is a weekly educational platform for creating success and change in your club and career. We're very excited and overwhelmed to have many of the section's past presidents joining us this morning. This is a different format than our usual Catalyst webcast. Today we've got 1, 2, 3, we got 9 past presidents joining us on the webcast this morning. We're going to go in chronological order from earliest to most recent. Each past president is going to talk about their tenure and the goals that they had, the challenges that they faced, and the impact that their governance had on the section and the game of golf in Southern California. And then we will have Q&A every 4 to 5 minutes after each president's presentation. So we do heavily encourage the attendees. Everybody's been given the ability to unmute. All the attendees have the ability to unmute and ask questions. And the goal is to keep it as interactive as possible. I do have some questions that I've compiled from the Education Committee and from the section board, but we are expecting the attendees to be active in asking questions as we go through. So again, thank you for joining us this morning. We're excited about this format, and we'll get right into it. We'll turn it over to Mr. Addis, Tom Addis, past president, Southern California section.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for putting this together and bringing the group together. I think this is sort of unique. I noticed that our current president, Robin Shelton, is with us. Robin, thank you for being here this morning. Appreciate that. One of these days, you'll be able to, whether you want to or not, join this group. So, and I think that would be great if you make it. Kidding, of course. We'd be honored. Yeah, this is something, as I mentioned, it's unique and we appreciate being here. I'm glad you used the word chronological instead of oldest,
right?
Because I believe I'm both, even older than Sargent and Tooney on this group. And I'm only wishing that Skip were here so he could take that little bit of piece of it. Yeah, the Southern California section has quite a history. As you might know, and starting in 1924 with the charter of 25 clubs, and we're looking forward to that 100th, our centennial anniversary in 2024, and celebrating that. So we've been around a long time, formed 8 years after the PGA of America was formed, and we have a great history, as I believe everybody knows, whether it be through our section tournaments, our section championship, our past presidents, our total governance, and of course, our great membership, numbering in the neighborhood of 16 to 1700 now. My term was in 1980, 81, and 82. Back then, you had the option to do 3 years if you'd like. I was followed by Bob Lovejoy, who unfortunately isn't on the call this morning. And then, of course, Andy followed Bob, and we were able to do some pretty nifty things out there. I think something that probably stands out and that had quite an impact later on into the well into the 90s. And this is, by the way, and a lot of you don't know this, Ron O'Connor was our executive director at the time. Ron, you all know, is a member of our rules committee and a staple in all of our tournament and member activities. So I had the great pleasure to work with Ron when he started as our executive director, and appreciate everything that he did at the time and continues to do for the Southern California PGA. So that's pretty cool to say that that I was honored to work with Ron. As a matter of fact, I carry a money clip still that Ron presented me to me in 1982 as I went out of office as president of the section. So it's fallen out of my pocket a few times. There's usually nothing in it, so it's pretty light. But the jewel is broken off a couple of times, and I've epoxied it back on. So I continue to carry that after 40 years, and I'm very, very proud of that. So thanks to Ron for that, and a great remembrance. But back to the show, back to the accomplishments, if you will, and an activity that had a huge impact later on was the establishment of and John, you're going to have to time me here. Time me out, I mean.
Yeah, you're on the clock.
Or give me a warning. But we started the West Coast International Golf Show with a meeting in 1979 and then put together in 1980, starting at Industry Hills in the parking garage way back then. And we did a couple days in the parking garage. The show expanded into San Diego, then to Las Vegas, and then into the PGA. When the PGA acquired the show, kept the show in Las Vegas, and it remains there, even though on a much smaller scale. But the financial impact that show had later on allowed us to build the golf club, finally sell the golf club, invest some significant funds in our investment program that gives the section a very, very healthy balance sheet. So if you start back then, all 40 years ago, and the result of what we're able to do in the Southern California PGA with our programs and activities and our events really points to the success and the longevity of that show, and being able to sell the show and utilize those funds for various other activities. So we're pretty proud of that, and appreciate the opportunity to be involved in the section for now for this. I was first elected on the board in 1974, so it's been a significant amount of time, and I appreciate everything and appreciate the opportunity. So thank you all, and have a great Memorial Day weekend, everybody.
Thanks, TA. During your tenure, what was your biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge? I don't know. I didn't look at it that way, John. I think overall, we did quite a few things that were opportune at the time. For example, we started the Western States Apprentice and Assistants Championship that later turned into the FootJoy National Assistants Championship. That was a huge success, bringing together the disabled golfers with the help of PGA members such as John Klein, for example, pulling every little piece of our population in Southern California together. So I really didn't look at any challenges necessarily. As the old saying goes, only opportunities. And I think we took advantage of things in that manner with what we were able to accomplish, whether it be the show, successful section activities, working with the disabled, and providing an activity for our assistants to compete.
So not to jump ahead, but that's the same show that during Tom Sargent's presidency, he was responsible for selling that, correct?
Yeah, Tom was involved in that, as was Jeff and others. Yes. Thank goodness.
Questions from the field for Mr. Addis?
What were your major like milestones that you kind of checked off when you were going through creating an assistance championship?
I think back then, one of the goals was to bring the assistants together. There was really nothing. Now we're going back to that tournament actually started in 1977 and continued through 83 or 84, if I recall, finishing up in Las Vegas, and then the PGA Assistants Championship. And that was the idea, to bring assistants together and give the assistants an opportunity to compete on at least a larger regional level, and hopefully would. One of our goals was to, and Dick Geckner was one of the mainstays, as was Ron O'Connor, of that event. And I believe they'd say the same thing. One of the major goals of that event was to create a national event, which finally happened with the PGA Assistants Championship.
Mr. Addis, this is Tom's son. What's the meaning of serving the association for you?
Pardon me, the what of serving?
The meaning of serving for
Meaning
you.
of serving? I think that's a great point, because like many on this call, I've had the opportunity to serve since the early 70s. I'll be a 50-year PGA member in September of 22, and got involved right away. And I think one of the strongest meanings is the involvement factor, creating interest, and what it brings not only to the association, but I believe firmly to your job and your club and your facility, because the more you're involved, regardless of where it is, the better professional you are, the better business person you become, because you get a much broader view of what's going on out there. And of course, I've had the great opportunity to be involved nationally for a number of years, and what you get to see and learn and participate really enhances your life and your job, and in many cases, as it should, your family. And I think that's been the strongest meaning, Tom, or what's meant more to me than anything, is that involvement aspect, and what it's meant to my family and my job at the same time.
And of course, Tom's son, you know that Mr. Addis was also national president of the PGA 95, 96.
5 and 6. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, the always candid and energetic Andy Tooney, you're next.
Thank you, John, and allude to a couple of things that Tom talked about, because it was just Bob Lovejoy that was between the two of us. I can remember how small a staff we had back in those days. Tom mentioned that Ron O'Connor was our executive director. I think we only had about 2 other people working in the office, one April Ohlweiler, and because her first name was April, I remember Skip Whitted giving Ron O'Connor the nickname of August. Well, I guess Skip thought everybody ought to have a month as their first name or as their nickname. So yeah, back in those days, we only had a couple of people working out of our tiny little office in the red brick building down there on Coenga Boulevard, which is still the building for the SCPGA, the amateur body. But it was fun because you had to work very closely with everybody to get things done. I remember Ron and I putting together the directory for the section in conjunction with the SCJ, and it took a lot of work to get a hold of people and say, where are you now? What are you doing? What's your phone number? And what's the address of the club where you're working? And then the next thing I remember, back in 86 and 87, that's when we hired Don Sandifer to help with our merchandise show, which Tom also alluded to. Don affectionately called it WICMS, the West Coast International Merchandise Show. And as Tom was saying, it moved from the Industry Hills Garage to, I think, eventually Long Beach Convention Center was one of the next places it moved to before we moved to Vegas. And it got really, really big under Don's guidance. And that became quite an asset to the section, as Tom alluded to as well. I remember also being involved in the Western Apprentice Championship, which a couple of years we had at Edgewood and Tahoe. And Orrin Vincent, who happened to be the director of golf there at Edgewood at the time, helped out quite a bit with that. I remember one year we flew in the day before and there was still some snow on the ground there at Edgewood. And so it gave us some difficulties, especially a couple of days later when we were trying to finish the tournament, started to sleet and snow on us. That was a fun time. But we all had mentors. Obviously, Tom Addis was one of my mentors, a guy by the name of Howard Smith, and Dick Geckner, who was very involved with the apprentice program. So that was kind of where my heart was for many, many years. I think after I even got off of the board as past president, I got back on the board as the apprentice chairman for a couple of years after that. And then, of course, I had the distinction of helping Tom with his national campaign, Addis in '88. I'm sure Tom remembers those days in New Orleans. Boy, that was a fun campaign to run. And if sometime you want to ask Tom about how close it was first time around, and then Tom Sargent wound up 2 years later helping Tom with his campaign to finally get elected to national office. I do remember one thing at the national meeting, I want to say in probably 1986. I had the the pleasure and distinction, I'm not sure it was a distinction, of getting up in front of the national body and kind of complaining that the national body has like a Senate, but not a House of Representatives. Because at the time, in our district, District 11, us, NorCal, and Hawaii, we had close to 3,000 members, but we only had 7 votes. You get 2 votes for each section and 1 vote for your district director. So we only had 7 votes for 3,000 people, which was about 17 or 18% of the national number of PGA professionals. And there were several other districts who had maybe 1/5 that many members in their district, and they got equal amount of votes when you're voting on anything at a national body. And that made it, I got to give Tom credit for going after the national election 2 times in a row. The second time he won hands down. The first time, I think there was 3 runoffs, if I'm not mistaken. Tom could probably correct me on 4 runoffs. Oh my gosh. And he finally lost to Gary Shaw, I think it was at the time. But that was quite an experience. And if you've never had a chance to go to a national meeting, of course, that one was in New Orleans, which was something else. You should go to a national meeting just as a representative of your section and see how it actually goes down at those meetings. It's quite something. Of course, the last couple of years we haven't been able to do that, but hopefully the end of this year. And I remember attending the 2016 meeting with Tony Latendre, and we actually got to see where the PGA of America was formed up there in the Wanamaker building. So that's all I can remember. It was 33 years ago. Thanks, John.
So not to bounce back to Tom Addis, but in the '88 campaign, did it work similarly where you run for secretary, and once you're elected to secretary, you're then in succession to go on to vice president and president? Or was
That is correct. Yeah, secretary, and then used to be called treasurer. Now it's called vice president and then president. So 2 years in each.
Any questions from the field for Mr. Tooney? Mr. Tooney, what would you say was your biggest achievement during your tenure as president?
I think the biggest achievement was just continuing some of the groundwork that Tom and other past presidents prior to me had started, and that was the merchandise show, because it became such a big asset to the section. And like Tom said, continuing the Western States Apprentice Championship, because that was a great event for assistant golf professionals. In fact, we had a guy from our section, what was his name? Lauren Roberts. He was a pretty good player. I think he won it twice. And that's what kind of encouraged him to get on the tour. That and the fact that he was a pretty good putter to boot. So just meeting people. Someone, I think it was Tom's son, asked Tom Addis what he got out of being on the section board. To me, it was just helping and learning, those 2 things. You got to learn a lot about the association of people, and you got to help the association of people, and that's what it's all about.
When you were talking about the directory book, I all these years I forgot about that book. That book was like the Bible.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize that it's been so long since that's been in circulation. I couldn't recall who actually put that together, either the SCGA, or if that's something that we did. Can you talk a little bit about what went into putting that book together every year?
Oh my gosh, it was just a lot of groundwork. I mean, obviously the SCGA helped us with that, but Ron just had to be on the phone, and April had to be on the phone with people and just trying to get me updating where they are, what they were doing, their new phone number, because back in those days we didn't have computers. Well, we had them, but nobody knew how to use them. I still learning how to use mine. So it was just a lot of groundwork, but that was fun. That's how you got to meet people and find out where they are and how they're doing.
Sure, sure. Okay. Tom Sargent,
Good morning.
good morning, sir. Can you talk a little bit about your tenure as president, the goals that you had, the challenges you faced, and the impact you think that your presidency had on the section or on the game in general?
Well, I think I didn't enter the presidency with any agenda. Some presidents would come in with a bend for education or employment or whatever, or playing. I tried not to have an agenda. I think one of the things that I feel really good about was I thought it was really important for us to learn how to operate as a board, how our committees should operate, and how our chapters should operate, and how we should interact with the staff, because at that point the staff was beginning to grow, and we were relying on them much more than we had before. Previously, a lot of this stuff was done by the board members, and we began to grow the staff. And you have board members, committee members that are they will tend to step all over the staff, and so we hired an individual he was a professor at Chapman, and his specialty was how to operate nonprofit organizations. And we trained our committees what their responsibilities were and how to interact. We trained the board members what their responsibilities were and how to interact with staff. Basically, the board was there to establish philosophy and direction, and the staff was there to handle operations. And I think it's pretty much that way now. So I think that had an impact. I think it's really an important aspect of any kind of nonprofit organization. Volunteers they can be a pain in the butt, and we're all volunteers. We can be a pain in the staff's posterior region. So I thought it was important to learn that stuff. Obviously, some of the other stuff that came along, the selling of the show was a big deal.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, and I've had the pleasure of hearing the story from you on how that all transpired. Can you give us an overview on how the sale of the show came to be and your role in that?
Well, it started, the National PGA began to show interest. And we soon picked up on that just by the questions they were asking and some of the comments that were made. And, eventually numbers kind of got thrown at us. I think people were just testing the waters. And the very first one was from the Jesse Holzhauser, who worked, I don't remember what was, Tom Addis, do you remember what his title was? He was the finance guy.
Yeah, he was CFO at the time.
CFO, that's correct. He tossed out the number of 300,000. And I tried not to giggle, but we didn't know what the show was worth. We had no idea. So eventually we had a valuation put to it. We were fortunate at the time we had a business attorney working with us, and he kind of pushed us in different directions and got us to do certain things. We had the valuation done, so we had an idea of what we thought the show was worth. And frankly, we were shocked when the valuation came back to us, because we didn't think in those kind of numbers. It was in the millions.
You were shocked, meaning that it was the offer was higher than you expected or lower?
Well, they hadn't made an offer yet, but they were throwing numbers around. And I think I mentioned this previously in one of our other catalysts, that we first sat down with Jim Autry, who was the executive director of the PGA at that time. we're sitting around a table, and I wouldn't be surprised. I know Perry Dickey was there. Andy might have been there. When he said just after we'd got done with the hi, how are yous, and how's the family and all that kind of stuff, and how's your golf game, he says, well, let's get down to it. He said, if I threw out say I was going to write you a check for $1.5 million, what would you do with it? And my response to him was, how frequently do you want to write that check? And I was just being a smart ass. But a little while later, that valuation for the show that we'd had done came back at like $7 or $8 million. What's interesting is Jim thought that I was the roadblock to getting the show sold. We'd had a meeting with our advisory committee, and this is something that our advisory committee, maybe one of the greatest assists they've ever given us, is they told us, you need to sell that show. At that time, we thought it might be worth $2 million. They said, somebody's going to offer you $2 million and you don't sell it, you're crazy. And that kind of helped push us over the edge. So we had an idea, and then when the valuation came back at $7 or $8 million, we were stunned. And then finally the show came back, and our attorney negotiated what I would call a great deal. And it was several million a year, or $1 million a year, $1 million up front, $1 million a year for 3 years, 1.1 million for 3 more years, and 1.2 million for 4 more years. It all came out to around $12 million. And that
What was the time frame? What years was this? Over what span of time?
It was in the early 90s. I think the sale might have been 93 or something like that. I can't remember exactly.
98. Gary Anderson, I think, was our president right then.
I think he was the president when it sold.
Yeah.
He was right ahead of me, but I was involved in the negotiations of it. It was an interesting time. I mean, it was something that we were all out of our league, that's for sure.
So this segues into Bill Holbert's presidency. Bill, you want to take it? You're on mute there.
Was Tom done? I got some questions for Tom, because that was a done deal by the time I became president. My president, that was, and I didn't follow Tom. I followed Scott Walter.
Yeah, you got to spend the money.
Correct.
No, so Mr. Holbert, your presidency was what 2-year segment?
98, 99.
98, 99. You want to talk a little bit about your tenure as president, the goals you had, the challenges you faced?
Sure. The significance to me of my term as president was, and basically my whole time in serving, which has been somewhat extensive, is the friendships, the relationships, and the gratitude that, as you've heard Mr. Sargent speak, you're serving with really smart, committed people that were way smarter than I am. The relationships that you have with staff, the friendships that you create with all the gentlemen on this call and all the other past presidents, all the board members. One that stood out for me in particular, rest in peace, was Chris Thomas, who worked for our section, during my tenure as an officer, and we became very good friends and spent a lot of time together playing golf. And it was our loss when he went up to Northern Cal to become their executive director, but it was certainly their gain. But as Tom said, I got to spend the money. So during my term was when we basically had a proposition from Oak Valley Partners to build a 36-hole golf course out in Beaumont. It involved a land grant, which basically meant the land was free, but it had certain contingencies in the contract. You could argue whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. We did our due diligence. There was supposedly a population boom coming to that part of the county, and golf was looking good. And then boom, the recession hit shortly after we opened. We also had 5 years in a commitment to build a clubhouse, which cost us, I believe, $5 million. Jeff Johnson can reiterate the numbers because he was in charge of that whole thing. And
Bill? Looks like Bill froze there. For the sake of time there, Bill, you there?
yeah, no,
Sorry, you froze there.
am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Okay. So I'm not sure where I froze, but the sustainability of the operation out there was such that, with the economy tanking and some other factors, we ultimately were able to sell it. And as was mentioned, we took that money and did some good with it. Well, we did a lot of good with it, but some stories from opening the golf course. I remember the grand opening where Jeff had us out on a plot of land that was up on a hill, and it was cold as all get out. And as president, I was supposed to hit a shot off some sod, and believe me, true to the term, I laid the sod over it. I hit it, I chunked it, hit it about 25 yards. I think it was not my finest effort, but I blame that on Jeff because, he was in charge of weather that day. The other thing that stands out to me, when we were under construction, I remember touring the golf course with Lee Schmidt, Brian Curley, our architects, and it was after they excavated some of the bunkers. I said, man, those are really, really look deep to me. And they said, no, it'll be fine once we fill them in with sand. And sure enough, I think everyone would agree that those bunkers out on that golf course were way too deep and needed to be softened. But, my whole term or second half of the term anyway was devoted to, the golf course project. But the thing that, needs to be mentioned is that, while each president has their thing, they're also in charge of everything else, tournaments and education and on and on and on. And it's not really, you're a leader, you're not really in charge. You're working with the board, you're working with staff, which, as was mentioned several times by Andy, that, we didn't have much staff at the beginning, and now we have a tremendous staff. And I think you basically are working a full-time job to oversee the operations and make sure that, things follow a strategic plan. If there is one, make sure that we don't get off track, and, make sure that you don't mess it up, make sure that you leave it better for the next person coming in than you did, when you took it over. So was probably one of the most gratifying things that I've ever done. It's an honor to be in this group, and it's an honor to know and count all these gentlemen as my friends, and certainly many more beyond the scope of this group.
Fantastic. Questions for Mr. Holbert from the audience?
Is there any specific life lessons or business lessons that you take away from having that experience of being the president of the section?
I think it's overall to surround yourself with good people, listen to people that you could consider as mentors. And it's also, if you're I first started serving back in the Northern Chapter when I was an apprentice, I believe at the time, and I somehow was elected to the chapter board and got my membership and became chapter secretary, and then chapter vice president, and then chapter president. And then I served for a significant amount of time from that chapter as a chapter representative. I think I drew the short straw because it was so far away and there was so much driving that no one else wanted it. But that led to me becoming a board member, and then secretary and vice president, president, honorary president. So it's a long-term process, but it's given me so much as far as the friendships, the relationships, but also the people that you get to know that have such a broad range of experience in the golf business and can contribute to what you are as a golf professional and as a business person. My only regret is that I didn't lean on these people even more than I did at the time.
If you were encouraging somebody to volunteer for a position with the section, where would you advise me to start?
At a committee level, either a chapter committee or section committee, if you have an interest, and reach out to those that are chairing. Particularly as we get towards the end of the year and get into a new year where committees are formed again. Anywhere you can get in, anywhere you can get your foot in the door. It's very time consuming to serve, but it's the best thing that I've done as a PGA member.
Thank you.
So the completion and construction of the golf course definitely took up the bulk of the focus and the concentration of your presidency. On to Patrick Casey's term. Patrick, you the years that you served, now you served 2 terms?
Yeah, I served 04 to 05, and then Mr. Foster was in there for 2 to 3 months, and then I served 6 and 7.
You want to talk a little bit about your presidency, challenges, goals,
Sure.
outcomes?
Absolutely. So initially, I got involved with the section board in '96 as a chapter representative out of the Desert chapter, and my goals at that time were mainly around employment, education, and junior golf. When I became an officer in 2000, obviously the focus had turned towards golf properties. So we had a separate board, a golf properties board, that was made up of obviously our officers, our staff, and some dignitaries within the business industry. So we had a pretty heady group in there, but it became apparent very quickly that we were way in over our head. Operationally, we got off to a good start, then 2001 hit. And then from 2001 forward, golf properties really became a drain on the section, financially, staffing wise, and so on and so forth. When I became president, we sort of had a rogue executive director, so it was very clear that we needed to make a change there. Pat Riley helped us bring in Tom Addis as our executive director, so that was a good move in the right direction. But we were bleeding money pretty quickly. Obviously, we put in nearly $21 million in cash into the ground into this project, another $6 million in a loan for the clubhouse, and it became apparent very quickly after 2001 that the golf course was going to continue to be a drain. It was a real challenge with the past presidents, the staff, and the board to convince them to liquidate and to sell. It took us, 2, 3, 4 years to really get everybody on board that we needed to exit out of golf properties and to get back to doing what we do best, which is provide programming and opportunities for our members and apprentices. So unfortunately, most of my term was spent dealing with golf properties and very little in the areas that originally why I got involved, which is education, junior golf, and employment. But we had a section staff that was at the beginning when I got involved was as high as 27. It dipped down to 10 during that time. So that was a big challenge that we had, as well as the financial challenge. We had to reach out to the PGA of America to help bail us out on a number of occasions, both legally, financially, and also with the, with our staffing. So I was, when I left in 07, Scott Stubbs was the incoming president and saw the sale of the show through to fruition. I think we ended up netting about 8 million out of that. So you can if you do the math, you can kind of see that financially it was a huge drain. It was a big drain on our staff. And I'm glad that we're in a position now that we can get back to what we're doing best, which is providing programs for our members.
So you said during your presidency, the section staff dwindled and shrunk. What was the biggest reason why it got so small?
Well, many of our resources, even though they shouldn't have been being commingled, the time and effort on section staff to go and operate golf properties was a huge burden. As we were scaling back in golf properties and we were losing the amount of money we were losing, we had to really take a look at all of our expenses on both sides, or in all of our buckets, all of our silos, so to speak. So section, corp, which is our tournament arm, and then golf properties. But we got to financially, we were in a position that had we waited much longer, we waited too long. I mean, we ended up netting 8 million. We should have netted much more had we been more proactive and gotten more buy-in from the board. But we were at a point where financially we were in dire straits.
Questions for Mr. Casey from the field? Okay, moving right along. Dave Foster.
Thank you, John, for doing this today.
Absolutely.
Mine will probably be pretty brief. Obviously, I had a very short tenure as the president. Doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy serving and that I didn't pay my dues. I was on the board many years. I only did spend a few months. Business restrictions for my total term. So I did have to resign after a few months, but I did stay involved just a few months. Was somebody asking something?
Yeah, can you shed a little light on why the
But anyway,
term was so short?
I did serve a few months, but I wanted to get back involved. I did run again for the board. Go ahead.
Oh, no, just if you could shed a little light on why the term was so short, if you could speak to that.
I was working for a management company and I was the general manager at Talega Golf Club down in San Clemente. At the time, we were looking at going private, which meant building a new clubhouse. That was going to be quite a process. And it was going to really require my time. And being president, when you become the president, it is a big commitment. Unless you can provide that commitment, you really shouldn't do it. And I felt that it was the best thing to do in the interest of the section for me to resign at that time. And then, of course, as things turn out, we did not go private. We did not build a new clubhouse. So we all have regrets in our lives. I wish I'd have served out my term. But like I said, I did run again for the section board, got on it, served another tenure. Altogether, I've got about 15 years on the section board. Obviously, 2 as secretary, 2 as VP, and a few months as president. But I think a lot of the past presidents have said the same thing. You know, the friendships I made, you know, the gentlemen on this call just absolutely were great in my career. I can hang my hat on one thing in my presidency. Under my presidency, we did hire Tom Addis, and I actually signed his employment contract. And I believe that was a great accomplishment. You can see what Tom has done for the future of our section. That was a great hire at the time. And we were going through a period trying to find the right candidate. And quite honestly, not coming up with the perfect solution, but we did find the right gentleman. And I think we can all thank Tom for everything he's done for our section.
Indeed we can. If you were starting now in business, what approach would you take to becoming the best PGA professional you could be?
The best what? I'm sorry?
If you were starting all over again, what approach would you take to becoming the best PGA professional you can be?
Well, I think getting committed and getting involved is the best approach. From the time I got my PGA membership, I very quickly decided that I wanted to serve, and I think that helped my career. I think it definitely helped me within our section. I got on virtually every committee I could get on. I served on just about every one at one point or another. When I had the opportunity to potentially become an officer, I stepped up and wanted to do that. It's involvement, and I think that you as a PGA member, whatever you can do to give back will help you immensely. It definitely will help your career. I never had a job where my employers didn't like the fact that I was involved with the PGA of America and the section. I think it's a great career. And I think the more you get involved and the quicker you get involved, it's the best thing. I personally couldn't imagine just, not being involved. Everything I've done in my life. I mean, I became a commissioner in my town. Was almost going to run for mayor, those types of things. I like to get involved. And I think that's been really good for my career. And like I say, I still am involved. I'm on a couple of committees. I enjoy it and look forward to the future.
I think that you, in your mentorship, you've stressed involvement. I think that's had a big impact on Tony Letendre's service over the years. I think you would agree with that, Tony.
I hope so. Tony is a great guy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was searching for the mute.
I think he likes my brother better.
Well, it's not that I like your brother better, but a lot of people don't know this. But Dave has a twin brother named Dennis, and Dennis was my mentor growing up. So I've been very close with the Foster family for my entire career, And, thankfully,
Yep, you have.
Dennis Foster basically said to me, when you get your PGA membership, you'll be taking over for me on the chapter board. And that's how I got involved in 2004. So that was, I owe a lot to the Foster family for their mentorship.
And so not to skip ahead.
Well earned.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave. Not to skip ahead, but on to Jeff Johnson's tenure as president. Jeff, when were you president of the section?
From 2012 to 14, so a 3-year term.
You want to talk a little bit about your tenure?
I'd love to. It was delightful. Spending time with my fellow officers and friends of many, many years, Jason and Patrick, of course, Tony, Todd, and John. Always a treat as officers being in the same room and enjoying that collaborative experience. And I would make note that Patrick, who did serve those 2 terms, really brought a sinking ship back to the surface, and we should all be indebted and grateful for that tenure of 4 years and his commitment. I think one of the highlights for my tenure was really moving away, which still exists today, in reading and discussing committee reports and some pretty plain narratives at our general meetings, but instead preparing an actual program for each meeting. And my memories are pretty vivid of inviting some of our more mature members to share their life experiences in the game and business, and to have a brand new apprentice do the very same thing during the same program. And it was wonderful to see the contrast of the ages with all of us together in the same place. And I think there was a great deal of learning and appreciation that came from that. If I recall, we called it Remembering the Past and Embracing the Future. And it's more important today than probably ever before. I think my term was also marked with the exodus from Beaumont and its trailers, which were our headquarters, to the current building in Ontario. And it was a great move, to be sure. A move made easier because we had the resources to pay for that building without needing a loan. Again, all because of the timely sale of the golf course, albeit perhaps a tiny bit too late. But nonetheless, it was that time that allowed us the creation of our investment and finance committee following the sale of the golf course, and fine results that have occurred since then in retaining Canterbury Consulting, who has managed our portfolio this last decade and has proven remarkable with gains of over 8% year over year. Another very vivid memory was, as the section president, hosting the PGA of America's annual meeting in San Diego in 2012. And though I attended many of these annual meetings, being an integral part with our fine staff was truly an extraordinary experience. So 25 years as a board member and 9 years as a member of the executive committee and as an officer have been arguably the greatest years of my life, and enduring thanks to all of my colleagues and friends, and for everyone giving me the opportunity to serve.
So during your tenure is when we started with Canterbury?
Yeah, actually, I was the vice president when we retained Canterbury. We'd gone through a process of interviewing 3 very significant money managers. Bob Coomer, who was the chairman and president of Mellon First Business, had recommended highly Canterbury Consulting, and that's who we ultimately retained. And they've just done huge work on our behalf.
Questions for Jeff Johnson from the field? Jeff, I'm receiving lots of texts actually talking about how high you set the bar and how committed you were during your presidency. Just wanted to relay that to you.
I don't even know. I'm beyond grateful to hear that. It has meant the world to me to serve. Thanks.
Any questions for Jeff Johnson? Moving right into John McNair's presidency. John, when were you president of the section?
in 2015 and 16. But before we talk about my presidency, I just want to echo that about Jeff Johnson, the amount of time he put in, the effort he put in. I don't know how he did it. It was absolutely amazing. And our section is indebted to him. And in addition, just remember that we had some officer shifts. Some people left the section and whatnot during his time there, and Jeff stepped in and did an extra year as well, and just absolutely owned it. And our section is in great debt to that. So Jeff, just want to reiterate that as well, and thank you for your mentorship. So yes. So John, thanks. So it was 2015 and 16 that were my years that I was president, and I think the biggest challenge we had during my time is the apprentice numbers at that time nationally were dropping like to 25%, the less apprentices. So our focus during, and I say our because it was a team effort, you know, Tom and the team did an amazing job. It was really engaging the apprentices. We had special Crackle barrels for them. We invited the apprentices with notes, actually, you know, written notes, signed notes, to invite them to the annual meetings and to sit up front, so they could be front and center to make sure that they stayed engaged and you know, hopefully stayed all the way through their membership and became a PGA member. So that was a big part of it. I remember reaching out to Class F members as well as a big push to there again keep them engaged in our business and section. So that was one of our big focuses during our time. So.
And during that tenure, did you see a turnaround or a slight increase in apprentice numbers as a result of that campaign?
I think it's stabilized. I mean, I think in our section, yes, we had more engagement. I think the numbers went up just a titch, but just to even stop it at that point, because there was a few years of it going the other way. And there again, this is mainly on a national level, but it did affect our section greatly as well. So that was one of our big focuses. And yes, the other thing I want to mention is we brought during the time is we put an empty in the boardroom. I think this is important to note when a chair, and I call it the empty chair. We put a poster board of the section with the different chapters. And it was when we were in the boardroom, I wanted to make sure that every decision we made, we wanted to consider how did it affect the section, the chapters, and all 1,750-ish members at that time in the section. So I think that's important. I think I assume and know that future boards and officers will focus on that as well. We hope, because if you think that way, you're going to be successful in whatever you do for the PGA of America. So. The last thing I just want to mention, I want to leave time for my colleagues because it's getting tight here. But a lot of the guys said it, the friendships that you spent. You know, we talked about Jeff there, Todd, Tony, Eric, Jason, the board. That's really what makes it so special with serving. So that's my fondest memories of the entire time there. So with that, I want to turn it over to my colleagues to make sure they get some time in before the end. So thank you.
Certainly. Well, we know Todd Kiefer was your vice president during your presidency and your successor. Mr. Kiefer, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. That's actually my favorite honor is being John's vice president. I think John did an amazing job, and much like we talked about with Jeff and the mentoring that we received from the past presidents, those are the richest memories that I have. It was you know, when you become the president, I guess there's a lot of things that are expected of you that you've been in the room being prepared for all along. And so Tom Sargent said it best in terms of being agendalist. I think the focus was to just do what was in the best interest of the professional in our section and engage and promote them. And I think the highlights for me were, you know, really, we created the California Coaching and Teaching Summit. I think we helped to transition the foundation from an advisory committee to its own entity. And, you know, we were able to kind of launch the Clubs for Youth program and do other mentoring. I think the notion of mentoring and engagement really kind of kept a theme going. That really kind of stems from Jeff and John and Tom, because I think so much of what we did was a group effort, and it wasn't about one person. It was just, you knew you had the responsibility to support each other and learn from each other. And while it's difficult on your personal time, it's the best outcome you could ever hope for professionally and personally, because you are so enriched.
The Clubs for Youth, that was the Lizette Salas Azusa High golf team. You did that at Wilshire, didn't you?
We did. I think we did a few different presentations along the way, but this is a good example of having a great staff. The staff really kind of helped to develop the idea. I think we just try to kind of promote it and get it out there for different areas. And certainly when I was at Wilshire, we were able to kind of put those two pieces together and have that moment. But you know, it's really the tireless effort of all the staff people that we have and what they do for each of us every single day really goes unnoticed in many ways because it's running smoothly. We probably notice it when it doesn't go great, but you know, these guys have just really committed themselves, and so much credit to the staff.
Indeed, indeed. And we've got a couple of minutes left. We had to save room for our honorary president, Tony Latendre.
Well, I guess the benefit of going last is that everybody said all the things that you want to say. You know, I mean, for me, I look at this panel of individuals, and I look up to every one of them, and I have my entire career. I mean, for crying out loud in the desert, and sorry, Patrick, ahead of time dating you, but you know, Patrick did my apprentice association, or I mean, my apprentice orientation when I was just getting into the business, and that was in 1998. So that was so long ago, but you just talk about how long everybody's been involved and how you're connected. For me, you know, everybody on this call was a mentor to me in some way or another. Obviously, you know, like Todd being John's vice president, I had the distinction of being John's secretary. So, and then I got to be Todd's vice president. So it was really an honor to do those things because you get these relationships and you forge these forever friendships. And it's a brotherhood. I mean, I look up to these guys like big brothers, and you know, everybody on this call, like I said, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest part about everything we do is, yeah, you're serving your section, and it's a desire to serve your section that drives you. There was a question from Jonathan that was posed to all of us that was, you know, how do you balance your work job and your PGA life? And I simply responded that, you know, you do it because you wanted to do it. You know, you serve the association because you want to serve the association. You want to serve your fellow members and associates. And so it doesn't become a burden. You figure out a way to do it. You know, you always have to figure out your work-life balance. Well, now it just becomes work-life PGA balance, and you figure out how to do it. But it doesn't feel like it's a burden because, like I said, it's very rewarding. I'm so thankful for everything that I've gotten to do during the time, you know, not only the relationships that I've had, but to be able to serve and attend national annual meetings, to see how PGA governance really works. I'll never forget my first annual meeting. And I think it was, I don't remember who said it a little bit earlier, but they said, if you get an opportunity to attend a national meeting, you should do so. And I'll never forget how wowed I was by walking into the room and seeing the production and the presentation of what was the PGA of America's annual meeting. And I tell people to this day that if you aren't fired up about being a PGA member after attending the annual meeting, then you should just get out, because it's the most rewarding thing I've ever experienced. And so to be able to do that, to be able to, you know, network with people around the country, I have friends around the country now because of this, especially in our district. Our district is so tight. And so I just think all of those people that I've been exposed to have made me a better golf professional, top to bottom, and a better operator. And as Tom said, it's a value to your club and a value to your career by just being around such great people and learning such great things.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, that's all the time that we have this morning on the Catalyst webinar series. On behalf of the Education Committee for the SoCal section, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to all the past presidents for volunteering to come on the webcast this morning. It was enlightening. I mean, with this cast of characters, we could be on here all day and still not cover everything. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this morning. Any parting comments or statements from the panel?
Just thanks.
Twice.
I'm going to say thanks for allowing us all to serve. You know, we serve you, the PGA member and PGA associate, and I think I speak for everybody on this call when I say thank you for allowing us to do so.
John, if I could, as Todd said earlier as well, simply the finest section staff in the country. They make all of this possible. Thanks to the very best people we could ever want to know. So, and to you, Mr. Addis, for your leadership.
Yep.
Nicole.
Thanks to everybody.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for supporting the Catalyst webinar series. We'll see you next week. Stay safe, stay sane.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Happy Memorial Day.
Happy Memorial Day, everybody. Take care.